It's... Nah. Right, okay. Hi, and welcome back to the channel, or just welcome if you're new here. Now, I'm recording this on Saturday, 6th of February, and with the events of the news in this week, both in general and in racing news, it's kind of made me consider the meaning of that word of hero. Now, one person who's definitely earned that in this news this week for sadly passing away was that of Captain Sir Tom Moore, a man who, at 99 years of age, still decided he could make a difference and give something back, capturing the imagination of the whole nation. As a result, he's inspired many people to take on challenges and face things they might not otherwise have done. His death leads to tweets from everyone from his family to Lando Norris and McLaren and even the White House, of all people, posting their condolences. And it's the determination to go forward, to not stop and to do everything that you can that I want to talk about today. Now, any driver who's been successful has had to sacrifice an awful lot to do so. Several never managed to achieve the goals that they set. However, there are some people who shouldn't have had a hope of getting in a car or returning to a car, as the case may be, whose sheer determination and drive to overcome the obstacles in their way and to go beyond means so much more than the results. And the five I'm going to be talking about today, to me, genuinely are heroes. I'm not going to try and put any of these in any kind of order, but I'll start with Juan Manuel Correa, as he's had great news at the start of this week, confirming that he will be racing with ART in FIA F3 this year. Now, injured in an accident on August 31st, 2019, he spent 2 weeks in a coma with severe injuries to his lungs, spine, and especially his legs. In the 16 months since the accident, he's had more than 20 operations and spent 14 months with a metal frame around his right leg. Now, it was recently removed, and instead he has a metal rod inserted in the bone to keep it together. The damage sustained to his right leg involved the loss of 6 centimetres of bone, which was too damaged, and part of the process he's had to undergo has been to regrow it. The medical opinion at the time was that if he recovered enough to go racing again, it would be a minimum of 2 years to recover, and the speed of his recovery has caught people by surprise. When Juan contacted Sebastian Philippe at ART about a possible drive, according to Juan, well, Seb thought I was crazy at first. He thought I meant 2020, and he laughed when I replied, No, this year. General consensus on Twitter currently is that no one's really expecting huge things from him for this season, but we're all just happy to have him back. The wounds for Correa weren't just physical ones either. The accident that nearly ended his career claimed the life of another popular young racing driver in Anton Hubert. On the subject of Anton, Juan said, "Of course I feel sadness. Anton was a good friend, but now I feel that I have to return, not only for myself, but also for him." Only time will tell how competitive Correa will be after his recovery, but it will be good to see him. Everyone knows the story of Lewis Hamilton and the struggles he had early in his karting career, with his father working multiple jobs so he could put a battered second-hand car out on track. Now, watching Lewis pull through all of this and progress up the ladder, though, was his younger brother Nick. Now, understandably, Nick grew up wanting to emulate his brother and become a racing driver as well. Problem was, Nick had cerebral palsy. Now, his parents were told when he was 18 months old that he would never walk. Still, the same determination to win that flows in Lewis's veins clearly shows in Nick's as well, as by the age of 17 he had managed to leave the wheelchair behind and was walking. In 2011 he was allowed to go racing and competed in the Renault Clio Cup sporting the BTCC. And on the subject of the BTCC, he had become the first disabled driver to compete in that in 2015. His sheer force of character has not let his disabilities stop him, and he's been an inspiration to disabled and able-bodied people alike. Although on the subject itself, Nick himself has said in an interview that, "I'm just being me. If people find me an inspiration, great, because I'd love to inspire people and just show people that you can do whatever you want if you work hard for it." Lewis has often said that Nicholas is an inspiration to him, and Nick's journey from being told he'd never be able to walk to scoring points in the BTCC is truly a feel-good story. While Nick can't boast podiums or victories on track, he's surely a victor in life. Now, some people who only know Robert as someone who returned to drive a dog of a Williams for one season, his inclusion on this list may seem a little strange at first. We need to put his Williams season in context, so first a little history. At the start of 2011, Robert Kubica was considered one of the hot properties on the grid, with drivers like Lewis Hamilton and Fernando Alonso backing him as a talent. Midway through the 2008 season, he was even leading the F1 Drivers' Championship, with a decision by the BMW team to switch focus for the following season rather than chase the title that season would prove very costly, and Robert wouldn't get another chance to drive a race-winning car again. With background talk going on about possibly signing for Ferrari to partner Fernando in 2012, he took time out in February 2011 to go rallying before the F1 season got underway. Partway through the stage, he lost control and the car hit the barrier, which sliced through the car, partly severing Robert's right arm and causing multiple fractures from his feet all the way up his body. All these years later, his arm and hands still suffer from limited strength and mobility, and he has trouble bending his fingers on his right hand. After 17 operations, he returned to racing rallying cars 18 months later. In 2013, he also spent time in the Mercedes simulator, but he wasn't able to bend his wrist enough to drive the proper car. Unfortunately, whether it was due to the reduced mobility, he had continued to have a mix of success with some rough crashes in rallying, and the money started to run out. 2016 looked bleak, but Robert, being Robert, just gritted his teeth and refused to stop. Over the next year, he'd test several different cars, including WEC and DTM, to maintain his hunger and motivation to compete, looking for a series he'd be able to compete at a competitive level in. In December 2016, he'd spent time in the Dallara simulator that encouraged him to have another look at single-seaters again, and in June 2017, he'd step into an F1 car again for the first time since 2011, with Renault giving him a run in the 2012 Lotus they used for exhibition runs. Reflecting on their experience, Robert said, "I needed to get back to a proper rhythm in my life. If the chance will come, I need to make the maximum out of it. And most of the cars I was able to achieve what was my target, and 4 months ago nobody could expect this, and that's why I really appreciate the chance Renault are giving me, but I want to do my best." The test went well, with Robert completing 100 laps and posting a quicker time than the team's reserve driver, who was also there. As a result, another test was organised, and from looking like the door had closed on him for his F1 future, the door now was opened again. In the third test, though, with more modern cars and the newer Pirelli rubber, though, he struggled to keep the pace, and Renault started to cool on the idea of placing him in a race seat. Williams, though, were happy to sign him as a reserve driver, and during that year he showed that despite the injury, he still had flashes of pace, good technical feedback and a capable racing brain. Despite the injuries, Williams signed him as a driver for 2019. And yeah, we know what happened, and on paper the results don't look great. But Robert was going head to head with a driver widely regarded as a future world champion in a car which was an absolute dog. If the car had possessed midfield running pace, where would Robert have ended up? He was often up with George in the races, and when the opportunity to score a point occurred, it was Robert that took it. And clearly he didn't have George's pace, and there's no shame in that. But when you look at the extent of his injuries, we're talking about someone having to drive an F1 car basically one-handed. So it's not a question of how George beat him. The question is more, how did he manage to be as close as he was? The return wasn't the fairy tale we'd hoped for, but he's still currently involved in F1 with Alfa Romeo, and has kept up his racing, competing in DTM last year and Daytona 24 so far this year, so the competitive drive is very much still there. And after everything he went through, getting back into Formula 1 at all just backs up what Mark Webber said about him. What a warrior he is. On 16th April 2017, Billy Munger was racing in British F4 at Donington Park. Partway through the race, he became unsighted in traffic and collided with a stationary car which had spun in the middle of the track at a speed of 120 miles an hour. The crash left him needing both legs to be amputated. The support from the public at large, and the racing community in particular, was huge. Billy, during his recovery, would say, "All the support just made me more determined to get back in the car and win again. That's my goal." That's something that hadn't happened in single-seaters before, so as a mission statement went, it was certainly ambitious. But within a year, he had returned to racing an especially modified British F3 car, driving for the Carling team. His first weekend in the series confirmed that he still had the determination and skill to be competitive, as he took a podium. By the end of the year, he had finished 6th in the title, with 2 pole positions and a further 2 podiums, memorably stealing Daniel Ricciardo's celebration by doing a leggy. When you consider that, but for a rule change, he wouldn't have been allowed to compete with the injuries he had, it was a brilliant year. Moving on from there, he'd spent 2019 competing in the Euro Formula Open Championship, and whilst the championship challenge looked unlikely, he did get the win that he had been after, winning the prestigious Po Grand Prix. Sitting in the pitting at the end of the formation lap as the rain started to get heavier, he made the most of the changing conditions to grab the lead and held it to the line. Sadly, financial restrictions have always proved to be tight for Billy, and being unable to move up the junior formula ladder, he looked at other ways of staying in the racing world, becoming part of the presenting team for Channel 4's F1 coverage. During 2020, he also started his own YouTube channel where he'd been talking racing, and on 17th of April 2020 he released a video entitled My Third Happy Alive Day, where he stated his happiness for the future and again thanked the NHS, taking time as well to praise them for the work during the coronavirus pandemic. Prior to this, in 2019, he was named as one of the racers on the Extreme E Driver programme. When asked about it, he replied, "Everything we do now will affect future generations. It's definitely a responsibility and one that I can't and won't just ignore." He would eventually test the car in October of 2020 and commented that getting to drive the car was really cool. The whole experience was completely out of my comfort zone, but I like a challenge and it was great fun. You always get the impression that the adjustment from a guy driving a race and racing a car to a known face, presenter and borderline celebrity hasn't been an easy one, but such is the respect he has for not letting his injuries stop him doing what he wanted to do, that when Juan Manuel Correa was in hospital, Billy had gone to see him, and Juan genuinely felt that it helped him get his head together and focus on his own recovery, knowing Billy's story and talking to him. I've got a picture of Billy with Ayrton and when we met him briefly at Snetterton during his British F3 season, and that picture's framed and hanging outside Ayrton's room. His whole attitude to his injury was amazing. In fact, it kind of reminds me of the last person on my list for this video. Few drivers or people in general have inspired in modern times like Alex Zanardi. He is a man that truly transcends his sport to become a true legend. And while doing bits of research for this video, I stumbled on an article entitled Why Alex Zanardi is the Most Inspirational Figure in History. And typically the same day I started looking at Alex, the racing pilot on YouTube released an Icons of Motorsport video entitled Champions of Life, The Incredible Story of Alex Zanardi, which I thoroughly recommend, and I'll leave a link at the end of the video or in the description. In a 3-minute video called Touch the Sky of Alex Zanardi, in association with BMW, Alex starts by saying, "I'm Alex Zanardi, the big optimist, a man who learned that, in life, so long as you have something to fight, even your greatest defeat can be turned into your greatest victory." Having had a difficult time during his 2 spells in F1, in 2001 he returned to the US Kart Championship, where he'd won back-to-back championships in the late 90s. Unfortunately, his return didn't go to plan, and he was struggling, which unfortunately culminated in him having a big accident at the Lausitz Ring in Germany, where the nose of his car was ripped off and he lost both legs and 75% of his blood. His reaction to this set the standard for what was shown by the other races I've mentioned, or maybe that's just how a professional sportsman who's passionate about what they do would react, but to me it's extraordinary. As a child, he designed his own karts. As an adult, he designed his own prosthetics, having been dissatisfied with the ones he'd been given. In 2003, he decided it was time to deal with some unfinished business, getting behind the wheel of a racing car and completing the 13 laps to the Lausitz Ring that he'd not finished in his last race. During that run, he lapped at a speed that would have put him 5th on the grid for that race. And not happy with just proving to himself that he could still drive quickly, he'd then compete in European Touring Car for 5 seasons and would win several times in those years. Deciding to take a break from car racing, he looked around for other ways to satisfy his need for competition, developing a passion for hand cycle racing. He went on to win marathons in Venice, Rome and New York, earning the Italian hand cycle team an entry to the 2012 Paralympic Games in London, where he had won 2 gold medals. In the words of the man himself, "There's nothing mythical about what I did. I didn't jump on my bicycle because I wanted to go to London and win. I won because I wanted to ride my bicycle. That's the simple secret behind it." When asked about where he might be if it hadn't been for his accident, he replied, Who knows? Maybe I could be a guy with legs, but not as happy as I am now. He has never seemed to view his injury as something limiting to him, just as another adventure for him to go on and a new challenge to be met. When he was recently involved in a handbike accident while competing in a race in Italy, we heard the news about him being taken to hospital with a head injury and being in a coma. Both myself and my wife looked at each other and said that if there was one person on the planet who could recover from that, enough to enjoy life anyway, it'd be Alex Zanardi. He instills that kind of belief in people. He's one person I've never had the chance to meet, and I absolutely would have loved to have met Alex. It's something that is kind of a regret to me. Since his accident last June, it was reported in articles on the 14th of January that he has since regained his sight, hearing, he's able to recognise people and has begun to speak again. It is truly impossible to keep that man down. I appreciate that for the most part the drivers listed are European based, and there'll be many stories I've overlooked. If anyone has any other driver from this century who they feel's bravery and drive to overcome obstacles placed in front of them could be seen as heroic, then by all means mention them in the comments. I'm absolutely always happy to talk racing. But anyway, thank you very much for watching the video, and take care. Bye bye, family.